you could have handled this better. You should have handled this way. And really took the view off of what she did and what she said and placed it on myself. In doing that, I honestly feel like that's when manhood started for me. Just because you disagree does not mean you have to argue. It's all about how you manage those conversations.
We're talking marriage today, and that's only a small taste of what's to come. So let's get to it. Here we go. This is the show dedicated to raising up the next generation of men of faith and character. My name is Mark Stanifer. Welcome to The Next Man Up.
Part of the NRT Podcast Network.
Well, hey guys, welcome back once again to The Next Man Up and to the community that is raising up healthy and godly men. So good, as always, to have you with us for another episode. You know this, my name is Mark, and I'm excited to be with you once again. In case you didn't catch the title before you pressed play, today we're going to get into the topic of marriage and specifically talk about how you can divorce-proof your marriage. Now, maybe that seems like a strong claim and something that is difficult to do, but I think as we unpack this idea and get deeper into the conversation, you'll realize what we're getting at is something that's fairly simple in concept, but a challenge in practice. And whether you've been touched personally by divorce, or maybe I should say, however you've been touched personally by divorce, whether your marriage is rocking right now or it's on the rocks right now, there is content in here that will benefit you as a husband and you as well as a father, because we know that manhood is learned first in the home and husbandhood will also be learned first in the home. So whether it's for you and your situation, or you're coming at this as a father wanting to help your son grow in his understanding of marriage and relationships, there's something here for you. My guest today that's going to help us get into this topic deeper is Eric Terry, and he's on a mission to help build stronger communication in families, relationships, and communities. Eric has worked with a number of different nonprofit organizations. He's been in a ministry capacity for well over 2 decades. He's done motivational speaking and leadership topics. He's written a book that we'll talk about in the next episode, the second half of this conversation. And Eric believes this: if we can repair how we communicate, we can repair the world. And so there's a little hint of that key ingredient to divorce-proof your marriage that we're going to get into. Along the way, you're going to hear Eric's story, the things that he's learned the hard way, and the things that he's now brought into his life, his story, his new story that he's writing, and how he's helping others to do the same. So there's a bit of a primer for where we're going, a bit of a teaser for what we're going to get into, and so let's do that right now. Here is my conversation with communication coach Eric Terry. Well, Eric, what a pleasure to have you on the show today, man. Thank you for giving us some of your time. I'm excited to get into this topic today, and it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Absolutely, Mark. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. So I really want to get into this idea of not just divorce-proofing your marriage, but really, the key element to making it thrive. However, I don't want to give away all up front, and I typically like to start these discussions, these interviews, if you will, getting to know the guest. And in particular, I have a couple questions that I often start with. So let's start with this one today. Tell me about your journey to manhood. What was that like for you?
Interesting. I I always tell people I was raised in a house. I consider us the broke Huxtables.
What?
We had all the love, all the laughter, all the fun, just didn't have the money.
Okay. All right.
My parents, in February of next year, 2022, my parents will celebrate 50 years.
Oh my gosh, that's a huge milestone.
Huge. So I have watched my dad be this man that I hadn't seen anywhere else. My friends hadn't seen a man like him. So to see him interact with the kids, to see him, work a full-time job, care for and love on his wife, also be a full-time pastor, So he was the perfect example for my brothers and I to look at and to see. So we knew what manhood should look like. One thing about all three of us, we have an incredible work ethic because my dad, Mark, this is the kind of dad person my dad was. My dad woke up one morning, looked in the mirror, realized that the left side of his face was sliding down. He had had a stroke in the middle of the night. He brushed his teeth, washed up, got dressed, and went to work. See, this is the kind of ethic that he had.
Right.
These are the things we saw. What made it difficult for me was not knowing how to reproduce that.
Say more. What do you mean?
Having the work ethic was one thing, but being able to have the knowledge to reproduce what I was seeing, something that I did not know how to do. And I struggle with that because here's the thing that my brothers and I, we always joke about. We never heard our parents fight.
Oh.
Never heard them raise their voice. We only saw them loving on each other. Now, we knew when something was wrong because they would be in separate rooms for whatever reason, for whatever length of time. But we would never hear them argue. But as I got older, I realized the problem with that is that we never learned conflict resolution. So we knew that they had issues, but we did not get a chance to see them fix them. So unknowingly, we go into our first marriages thinking, oh, it's going to be just like my house. Not realizing that the woman that we're marrying didn't grow up in that house.
That's right.
So
that's right.
She's got a different perspective. And it took work. And unfortunately, each of us with our first marriages ended in divorce because we did not know how to reproduce what we saw my dad do. So people say, oh, you can't be what you've never seen. You can see it and still can't become it. That is possible. You've got to know the tools. You've got to know the how-tos to achieve what you're seeing. That was the thing that we struggled with. And it took a while for me, I'll speak for myself. It took a while for me to really kind of check myself, make sure I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, and really I call them mirror moments. Have a mirror moment with myself saying, okay, you could have handled this better. You should have handled this way. And really took the view off of what she did and what she said and placed it on myself. In doing that, I honestly feel like that's when manhood started for me because I was able to accept my own faults, my own issues, just acknowledge them and let's move on and let's work on it. That's when I feel like manhood kicked in for me.
So a couple follow-up questions. How old were you approximately when that happened for you?
I was 32.
Wow. And what was that moment like for you when you decided I need to have a heart-to-heart with the man in the mirror?
Man, it was rough. It was really rough because, you spend so much time, unfortunately, in those situations when you're still dealing with some immaturity. You still spend your time focusing on what the other person did. And you never stop and ask yourself, what could I have done differently? And until you do that, you will continue to have that same cycle in every relationship until you have that moment. For me, it was sitting in an apartment by myself. I had never lived by myself. I was either with my parents, with my brother, or with my wife. I never lived on my own. So here I am, 32 years old, first time living on my own. And I'm literally sitting in an apartment with no furniture, a bed that's just sitting on the floor. I mean, when you say rock bottom, I mean rock bottom. And I knew in order for me to move forward, because here's the thing, I believe in marriage. I believe marriage works. I've seen it. I've watched it. I wanted to reproduce that. But I knew in order for me to do that, I had to check myself. And it was taking that time to do that allowed me to really kind of examine that stuff. And I had to go back to my ex and apologize. You know what? I blew it.
After the divorce, you went back and apologized.
I did. We actually had a long conversation. It's kind of interesting. When we had this conversation, she called me and she was apologizing for her part. And we didn't know this, but my daughter was in the next room and heard everything she said.
Wow.
And she got really specific about some of the things she did in the marriage. And because my daughter started really acting out and really having issues, and you could tell she was just having this mother-daughter battle thing, and we didn't know what was going on. It took her like 2 years to find out that my daughter heard all that. And she was upset with her mom because she felt like, you're the reason daddy's gone. And I immediately had to check my daughter and say, sweetie, you heard one side of a conversation.
Let me tell you the other side.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that was another part of it, because here I am now trying to explain to my daughter my part in it. Things I did. And here I'm explaining this to an 11-year-old.
Another humbling experience.
A very humbling experience. But, it let her know that daddy wasn't Superman. Daddy was a man. And I think I just spoke with her today, and it's like that part of our relationship is still there because she knows I'll be honest with her. She knows I'm not going to, sugarcoat anything, and I'm just going to keep it real. And I'm going to tell her, hey, this is what it is, so she appreciates that. But it's made for a better relationship to be able to parent our kids. We both moved on. We both remarried. And, now our kids are grown. So,
Yeah. Well, in terms of what you missed as a child growing up, seeing the tension, but never really seeing it resolved, talk about a gift that, although after the fact and with consequences, right? Talk about a gift to Absolutely. Be able to give to that daughter of yours, to see the relationship restored, not to what it was, but the relationship restored and responsibility owned and conflict worked through in a way that you never did as a kid.
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest struggles with my dad. He tells me all the time when we talk about this, that he wished he knew how. They really wanted to shield us from mommy and daddy issues.
Yep.
But it really would have helped us in our own marriages later on.
I told you this when we initially talked.
Yeah.
that was a recent recollection of mine, or a recent awareness moment of mine. Wow. That in our effort to help our kids, to shield our kids from some of the adulting that my wife and I were doing. Right. We hadn't really let them see us what's the word I'm looking for? Like work through, right? The working through the disagreements and the conflicts and our relative to many, our home is a quiet home. We don't have the yelling and screaming and part of that's just because of our personalities. We don't express that way. But even when there was tension, we resolved it just my wife and I. And I remember my my daughter just recently saying there was a moment well back in time where she actually saw us get upset at each other, the wife and I. And her first thought was, "Uh-oh, mom and dad are going to get a divorce." And
Wow.
Eric, we couldn't have been farther from a divorce event, but in
Right.
her mind, it was a significant shift in the dynamic of the
Yeah.
family. She was seeing some tension. And that was years ago. And obviously, we've made it through it and then some. But it was just hearing her talk about that moment was a reminder for me that, yeah, maybe as parents, we missed it. Similar to your parents, we never gave our kids the gift of seeing us argue and work through it after the fact.
Right. Exactly. And now with my kids, Deborah, we're kind of a Brady bunch. Deborah brought two. I have two. They're all grown. And one of the things that we share with them now, because the older two are married, and we explain to them that in their relationships, you need to have those moments. And I think another thing that we talked about before was that just because you disagree does not mean you have to argue.
Mm.
It's all about how you manage those conversations. Now, of course, if you go into it with the screaming and yelling, well, now you're arguing. That's going to be a shouting match.
Right.
And at that point, the problem with that is, at that point, no one's listening to understand. Everybody's only listening to respond.
Say that again.
At the time that you begin to argue with one another, whether there's a shouting match, you're screaming, and there's tension and emotion in it, no one is now listening to understand what the other one is saying. We're only listening to respond to what they're saying.
Yeah. Taking a very defensive posture.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Looking for a break or a breath that the other person takes so that we can interject and get our points across.
Exactly.
Right. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Of course not. But yeah, that's a difficult thing, especially when that's what you're used to. I did a poll on Facebook a couple of years ago asking how many people felt like arguing, and I put arguing in quotations, was a part of relationships. 98% of the people who responded to that poll said, "Oh yeah, that's normal."
Wow.
And I thought, my God, we got work to do.
Yeah.
we've really got work to do. I was sharing with the client the other day. He asked if we actually use the tools that we teach. And I said, of course we do. And he said, how? And I said, by doing the same things we've told you guys to do. We actually do those things. That's how we know they work. And he wanted some kind of type of proof of how, this was working and how it worked for us. And I said, well, let me give you an example. I couldn't tell you the last time my wife and I had a disagreement. I even called her in the room and asked her, do you remember the last time we were upset with each other? And Mark, it took us 3 days to remember the last argument. And It was years before that.
Wow.
And I said, it's because we respect one another's opinion. We listen to each other. We do something a little bit more. We like each other.
What?
I tell people, you can fall in love all day long, but love fades. If you plan on being with somebody for a lifetime, you better find somebody you like.
Let me say this. I'm pretty certain that this is implied in what you're talking about, but let me just explicitly state it so that we can be crystal clear. When you say you haven't had an argument in years, you don't simply mean you're ignoring your feelings or your frustration because you don't want to have it out because you know where it goes and it's just easier to not bring it up. I can see you nodding your head.
Good.
That's not what you're talking about, right?
Exactly. No, not at all.
So keep going. Say more.
Yeah. See, the thing is, we are, Deborah and I are so different. We are polar opposites. If she's cold, I'm burning up. I mean, we are literally that opposite. The only types of movies that we both enjoy are action movies, weather movies where, the world's coming to an end, that kind of stuff, and some comedies. We are so different in every area. So we were raised differently. We're going to disagree. We're going to disagree. We always do. It's how we manage the disagreements that makes the difference. So when I say we don't argue, no, we're not ignoring anything, because we're both too pig-headed to just ignore something that's upsetting us. We actually have what we call takeaways. If something is bothering one of us, we just come into the room quietly, calmly, ask, hey, can we share a takeaway? And it's just an opportunity to let the other person know what you're doing or what you're saying that's hurting them or that's bothering them, or just something they want to address. And here's the key. The key is to not take a defensive stance. The key is the only response, once she gives me that takeaway, my only response is, I hear you and I'll work on that. That's it. Now, the problem comes in when she doesn't see me working on that. Because now there's going to be a takeaway too. And so now
sound a lot like takeaway one.
Sounded a lot like takeaway one. So yeah, so you have to address it, but you have to own it. You have to take ownership of whatever the issue is and deal with it, work on it. So in doing that, there's no time for us to argue because there's no place for it. There's just really no place for it. We've just gotten to a point, and plus I think now, especially with us, we're older. We're at the point like, you know what? It's not worth it. That's another thing that we say this all the time. If it won't matter 10 minutes from now, let it go. It's not that deep. It's really not that deep. And just enjoying life and not letting small fights, small arguments tear us apart. Because unfortunately, if you think about it, most times when you hear about couples arguing or fight over something, it's something small. Now, there may be something bigger that's underlying, but usually the actual argument is usually something really small.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but I wanted to ask you anyway, because I'm curious your take on it. And you kind of alluded to it with the poll results that you mentioned, but do you think that fighting in a marriage relationship is inevitable?
I think ultimately, but even in the fighting, Mark, there's a way to do it, because here's the thing. I think the problem comes in when you say the word fight. People think either verbal argument that is just outlandish or a physical fight. And I don't necessarily see that a fight in marriage that way. I think you have to take into consideration what the topic is and what's your stance on it, because most times it's not what we say in those situations, it's how we say it. I'll give you an example. If I come into the house and walk up to my wife and go, "What are you doing?" With that tone, her response is not going to be too good. Now, I can walk into that room and say, "Hey, what are you doing?"
Totally different. Same words, totally different feel.
Totally different. I can change the atmosphere in the room by how I say something.
Yeah.
And that's the issue that I think we have a lot of times when we get upset about something. We're so emotional. And that's one of the things that I teach my clients. You've got to have the conversation without the emotion, because the emotion will destroy you every single time, because all it's going to do is create more emotion.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you've got a powder keg.
Yeah, you're hijacked by the emotion and you're letting it run away with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm thinking about the guy who's listening and is like, man, I'm in a difficult relationship right now. And I'm not even sure how to get to the point where I can give or receive a takeaway like you talked about, right? Like, can you back up a couple of steps and
Sure.
just talk to that listener about how to even bring a relationship, guide, or bring oneself to the point where you can initiate something like that and just get started with that type of a tool.
Absolutely. The biggest piece and the first thing you have to do is what I did with that man in the mirror moment is checking yourself. How am I handling these situations? So let's say, for instance, let's say it's a wife who comes to you, and every time she comes to you, she's on 10. She's on 10 from the start about whatever the issue is. The only way I can help alleviate this issue or kind of manage this issue is if I stay on 3. I have a long time of a customer service background, and I some kind of way became the escalated call guy.
Okay. Oh, even better. Like the most desirable spot in a call center has got to be that spot.
So they weren't transferring calls, escalated calls to supervisors.
No,
they were transferring them to me.
Yeah.
And here's what I found in every one of those situations, in almost every single call, 99% of those calls, Mark, when I kept my calm and kept my tone down and just talked evenly and asked the right questions, that's key. I found out that what they were screaming and yelling and so upset about was not even the issue. I had a lady that was literally she was threatening suicide. She was going off. Mark, when I finally get her calmed down to figure out what she needed, she lost her ID card.
Wow.
It was that simple. And I thought, she's been transferred 13 times and nobody got to the root of her. Yeah, she was hot by the time she got to me. All she needed was a new insurance card.
Wow.
That's it. And it's one of those things where the same thing in marriage. We've got to get to a point where we can't ask that wife to come in calmly and speak to me calmly if I'm still going to respond to her on 10.
Yep.
That's going to be the first thing. No matter how she comes in, wow, here it is. It's not what happens. It's how we respond to what happens.
Yeah.
And that's the first start, because once, especially if you're used to going back and forth and being in each other's face, once I feel like the average person, once they see that you have calmed yourself, they feel kind of funny to still be screaming and yelling.
It de-escalates the situation.
It de-escalates it. Exactly. Because I would just feel really crazy, screaming and yelling at somebody who was sitting there talking to me like this. You look really silly. So that's the first thing. So then once you're in that calm state, you can find out, what is the issue? What can I do to fix this? Now, here's the thing. A lot of times in those cases, they don't know what to say, because they've been so on a rant about something else. Now you ask them a legitimate question that makes them have to think for a moment. Okay, what is it that I actually need him to do? And it may take them a minute to be able to do that, but that's the first start. Just de-escalating the situation and finding out what the actual issue is. Most times we get into arguments, and like I said, the argument is never about that issue. It's always something underlying that's building that.
So I have a bunch of different thoughts running through my mind, but the last thing you said, or shortly before the last thing you said, reminded me of the parenting trick. And I'm not at all implying that as husbands we can, quote unquote, manipulate our wives like we can sometimes redirect our kids. But when our kids are throwing a tantrum or they're all uptight, sometimes that redirect right? That question or that suggestion to shift the focus off of their emotional state and engage the rational brain as much as a kid can have a rational brain, but like just engage other parts of their brain. It's like that in and of itself is a de-escalation a trick, right? Or tool, maybe is a better way to say it. And again, not implying that, guys, we can manipulate our wives. I think what you're saying is that when we can come in on 3 and stay on 3 and ask some good questions and like you said before, respect and listen for understanding, not just to defend and reattack. Exactly. Then it can calm the situation down and allow the other person to really get out what it is that's bothering them. Because as you said, it's not usually the issue. It's just the issue was the last straw that had been building for a while and and it exploded.
Exactly. And it could be the simplest thing. Mark, I'll be honest with you, and I have to share this with you because it's just hilarious to me. I had a client not too long ago who came to us because they were arguing, having some issues. And here I am trying to de-escalate and trying to get to the heart of the matter. And the issue we find was that the wife had been hiding juice. I'm dead serious. And my wife and I just looked at each other like, what? And they went on to keep talking. We said, no, let's go back to deal with the juice. What was that about? The husband evidently likes juice, so he drinks all the juice up. So she was hiding some to keep some for herself. And I turned and looked at him and I said, can you do me a favor? He said, sure. I said, buy more juice. You just got rid of that issue. You got rid of that argument.
Right.
Buy her own juice. I mean, it's just, you know, but it's those little things. Now, as we kept talking, we found out there were some other things that were going on.
Sure.
And this is what I'm talking about. Let's get the sight off of the juice and the thermostat and all these other little things, because once you do that, you can now manage the actual issue. I did a marriage retreat several years ago, and that's actually what started all this for me. And I did the lesson for that weekend was the top 10 reasons people divorce. And I think I shared this with you before. Yeah. It's one of those things that, you know, everybody will say, oh, it's sex, it's money, it's this, it's that. And I explained to my people that were there, I said, you know, it's all of those things, but more importantly, it's how we communicate about those things. And to end that weekend and have an older gentleman who had been married longer than I've been alive to come to me and tell me how much I taught him that weekend just blew me away. But it really is, it's how we communicate. Mark, that is all a good marriage is. Mm. It's two selfless communicators. That's it. If you can communicate properly, man, marriage is easy. It really is.
So you just made a bold statement there that is probably worth repeating. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad we finally got to the communication word, because we were circling around it, and I knew we would get there, but we were circling around it. Absolutely. We were hinting at it, but I'm glad you finally went there, because that is the bedrock. But what you just said was, if you can communicate well, marriage is easy.
Yeah.
Do you think most people believe that?
It's funny. I don't believe most people believe that. But at the same time, if you ask them 5 times out of 10, they're going to, when you ask them what the issue or what the biggest problem in marriage is, they'll say communication. Mm. but still don't understand that if you have great communication with each other, that it betters the marriage. It goes hand in hand. It's the same thing. But that's it. That's really, I finally realized this after several years of coaching and doing all this with the clients. It finally hit me one day. I said, I'm a communication coach, because all I'm doing is teaching people how to have the discussion. The discussions are going to come.
Yeah.
I'm teaching them how to have the discussion, which, watch this. Here's the funny part. It's behavior modification. I'm just changing how they think about something, how they process it.
Yep.
Because here's the thing, you can't, we talk about, you're not being able to see becoming that what you've never seen. Here's the thing. You can't come into a situation and resolve anything if you're doing it the same way you've always done it. If we are constantly fighting and constantly arguing, I've got to have somebody come in and give me some tools, because evidently the way I'm doing it is not working. So now I need to find the tools so I can manage this, but I have to modify how I'm doing it. I have to modify my behavior first. Now, hopefully, if you're with the right person, your modification of yourself, taking ownership and modifying you and what you do, hopefully, on the other hand, will allow your spouse to say, okay, maybe there's some things I need to work on. Now we can do it together.
If you can communicate well, then marriage is easy. I think I'm still processing that after our recorded conversation and then listening to it again. I think I'm still processing that, and would probably say it this way. If you can learn to communicate well, then you can work through anything that comes up. I think what Eric is getting at here is that the issues that seem to derail us in our marriages and in our key relationships probably aren't the issue. It's how we communicate about them that becomes the issue. And so if we can learn to communicate well, then certainly marriage does get easier. That's just one of the things that stands out to me from the first half of this conversation. I also liked the way he said this. He said, a good marriage is really about two selfless communicators. So think about that in the context of your own marriage, or your own relationship with a significant other, or your own deep relationships with others that are not romantic, that are not marriage. If you can communicate well in those relationships, then they grow. Said differently, if you can't communicate well, then those relationships don't grow, and eventually they will fail. Well, that's the first part of our conversation together, and we'll pause it here, pick up the second half next time as we get a little deeper into what's involved. And what's your responsibility as the man, as the husband? And what does that look like in a relationship to take the lead and work on improving your communication skills as an individual, and then how that can translate to improving communication in your relationship as well. So I hope you're enjoying Eric's story and his wisdom so far, because there is more to come. But let's call it here. Thanks, guys, for being with us once again. I look forward to being with you on the next episode as we continue this conversation on divorce-proofing your marriage with Eric Terry. Until then, guys, adios. Hey, listeners, thanks for journeying with us on this Next Man Up podcast. We would love to hear from you. Maybe you have a question or an idea, perhaps a topic for us to consider. If that's you and you want to reach out to us, you can get us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. That's feedback@thenextmanup.com. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we'll see you later.